Hello, deep learners. I'm Andrew Ng, founder of DeepLearning.AI, and I'm excited to welcome you to our global deep learning community. I know that many of you are here today because you want to break into AI and build your career. I hope that being part of this community will help you to do so. To give you a proper welcome, I'd like to show you around the DeepLearning.AI offices and meet some of the teams so that you can see where it all happens.
Oh, hi, Andrew.
Do you want to tell our friends at Pie AI what you do at DeepLearning.AI?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I make articles and other media that help people learn about AI and help them understand the huge impact that AI is having in the world. Today, I'm putting together the next issue of The Batch, our weekly newsletter, and I'm looking for the biggest stories of the week to keep our readers informed.
What's been the most surprising thing you've run into working on The Batch?
How much is going on in this field? There is never a dull moment. You might think from the outside that machine learning engineers really understand everything about AI, but nobody understands everything about AI because this field is just coming to life right before my eyes as I put this thing together every week.
All right, I know you're really busy, so I'll let you get back to it.
Thanks. See you later.
Let's go meet Kian, who helped me create the deep learning specialization. He's working on an exciting new project. Hey Kian, so do you want to tell the people at Pine AI what you're working on?
Yes, sure. I'm leading a project called Workera, focusing on helping people get offers in AI and navigating their career by testing their skills, preparing for interviews and certifying them, as well as matching and referring them to good jobs in AI.
That's really cool. And what's the most exciting part of your day?
You know, the AI field is new, organizations and jobs are still misunderstood. So I'm excited to help people understand what different types of jobs exist in the field, what tasks they will work on, and what skills are needed to achieve those tasks.
Yep, and that's really important work. Well, it's nice chatting, and now let's go chat to Hotel, who is on their product team.
Hey, Andrew.
Do you want to say hi to our friends at Pine AI and let them know what you're working on?
I would love to. Hi, everyone. I lead the product team in DeepLearning.AI, where we create AI education content accessible to people all around the world. People like you.
And what are you most excited about right now?
I am so excited to see our community grow and to see how eager people are to learn more about AI.
Thanks, Hotel.
Thanks, Andrew.
So, as you can see, our team is working hard to support you and help you learn. It's never been easier than before to break into AI. So if you want to build a career, you can leverage online resources available, including open source code, datasets, papers, and online courses like a deep learning specialization on Coursera. As part of this journey, I hope you get your hands dirty too. Don't be afraid of diving in to build your own project, or go ahead and try to replicate a research paper that you're excited about. One thing that I've seen help a lot of people succeed is if you can build a community or find a community of fellow deep learners you can meet with and study with on a regular basis. In fact, I hope that this Pine AI meetup that you're at right now will be a good place for you to meet these people. I hope you enjoyed the event today and that you learn a lot, both from the talks and from each other. And once again, welcome to the DeepLearning.AI community.
Good evening, fellow deep learners. I'm Jibran Kasif, your host for today, and I'd like to welcome you all to Pie AI Colombo, a community event introduced by DeepLearning.AI, which is an organization that opens up a gateway of potential opportunities for you to take part in, such as the events that can help you network with a diverse community of peers all around the world. Learn tips and practices from industrial leads, participate in brainstorming discussions, and many more. I'm here to inform you some exciting news along with that is that DeepLearning.AI has given a wonderful opportunity to the Mozilla Club of IIT to be the main representative host in the Pi and AI series of Colombo. This initiative will be further supported along with the Mozilla and FOSS community of Sri Lanka. This will be our first dive into the series, so sit back and await for your slice of pie. With that, I'll hand over control to the president of the Mozilla Club of IIT to welcome you all and introduce our distinguished speaker for today. Over to you, Brian.
Yes, thank you, Gibran, for your brief introduction. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Schrander, the club leader of Mozilla Campus Club of IIT. So, rather than that, I would like to invite you all on behalf of the Mozilla community of Sri Lanka to this event. When I was speaking about Mr. Denima, the guest of honor of our to the guest of honor of our sorry guest speaker of today's session, he is a renowned data scientist who is the founder and CEO of Sydney Data Science. And also, his core expertise is in data analytics, supervised machine learning algorithms, data architecture, and designing digital customer experiments for retail and banking sectors. Rather, Danny's passion is to guide businesses and individuals on their data and AI journeys. He currently runs Data with Danny community with over 8,000 aspiring data professionals, and is working towards his vision of creating a scalable virtual data apprenticeship program to empower others to kickstart their career in data. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Denima, the speaker of today's session, to continue the session. Danny, it's over to you.
Hello. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining me tonight or today for this session for the Pie and AI meetup. I'm very honored to be here, so thank you so much for your kind words. I think that was the first time I've seen that video with Andrew and taking us around the office of the DeepLearning.AI company offices. So that was really interesting for me. It's been about, I think, around 1 year since I last joined one of these meetups for Pi and AI. So to see where everything has come so far in 1 year it's really inspiring. Okay, so for today, I thought I'd talk about my journey into AI and data science in Australia. So for people who have not heard of me on LinkedIn or different places, my name is Danny Ma. I'm the CEO and founder of Sydney Data Science, my company in Sydney. And I am based in Sydney, Australia. And I've been working in the data science and AI space for the past 8 years or so. I've had almost every single role in the data ecosystem as well. So I've worked as a data analyst, a campaign analyst, a data scientist, machine learning engineer, and a data engineer. So I've kind of had quite a broad experience across the whole thing. And around, I'd say, April last year, I started posting more on LinkedIn and sharing more about my experience. And I wanted to help and provide some sort of mentorship to anyone who was interested in learning from me. So one thing led to another, and I built my own online community called Data with Danny from around April last year. And it's kind of grown into this whole thing over the course of the past year. And now I'm running my own Data with Danny online courses, and I'm also building out more initiatives for the community as well. So thank you again so much for tuning in for the session. So for any of the moderators, please feel free to jump in at any time to ask any questions that you're interested in. For this session, I didn't want to prepare too much. I wanted to kind of engage more with all the participants and answer as many questions as possible, because I know for me, when I was going through my data journey and trying to break into the data science space, I would have really appreciated it if I had access to mentors like myself or different experienced professionals in the industry to just answer all the different weird and wonderful questions that I had. So I'm more than happy to spend as much time doing that as possible. Okay. So I think for when we talk about AI and data science and breaking into the industry, I know that many of you are probably still in university. One of the guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Um, I think it's such a great opportunity right now in this space of the machine learning and AI to actually come into the industry where it's starting to really pick up pace, and there's a lot of great applications and different things and different ways that we can use the technology to improve businesses, to solve really challenging problems, and not just in the corporate space, but also for humanitarian needs, climate change, and all these other things that are really important and where machine learning can make a big difference. So I think it's really great that all of you are on the call and learning so much. And I think we're going live on Facebook as well. So this is my first time live on Facebook. So this is all new for me as well. So this is very, very exciting. So I know working in the industry and making the transition from studying in university might be a big leap for many of you. For me, when I was studying, I actually did a bachelor's of commerce. And I majored in actuarial science and business economics. But in all honesty, I don't think what I learnt in my undergrad career actually helped me very much throughout my career. When I think of my time at university, most of the time was just spent having fun with my friends and going out and having parties and not remembering a lot of things afterwards. So the studies part was not as I would have liked to have done more when I was at university, but I think I really learned a lot when I was on the job. So for my university, I was really lucky and I had some internships with actuarial science is very focused on insurance and financial modeling. So I got to do quite a few internships around the insurance space. And the main thing that I learned from my internships was that I didn't really want to work in the insurance space, but I wanted to work in the data space. So I was really lucky in that one of my first internships it was the end of my first year, and I was doing an internship with the insurance company called Allianz. They're massive. I don't know if they're in Sri Lanka, but they're like massive in Australia and massive all across Europe. So I was doing an internship there, and my manager actually was good friends with one of the managers at a company called Quantium, which was at the time in Australia, it was one of the newest data analytics consulting firms back in the day. So I caught up with some of those people and I learned about the different problems that they were solving with data. I found that was really interesting because it felt like they were doing some of the more traditional statistical methods, but applying it in a field where it wasn't traditionally being applied. So for me, that was really exciting. And after that meeting with that manager from the data analytics company, I kind of wanted to drive my studies and career towards that sort of journey. But I think at that time, data science and AI was not really a thing. This was like back in 2010. So it was quite a long while back. And it's like almost 10 or 11 years. So it's crazy. But yeah, I did a few more internships in the insurance space, and I eventually landed a graduate role with the Quantium, that analytics consulting firm in Sydney. And I started there as a data analyst. So I was doing lots and lots of SQL, lots of Excel. We were using SAS or SAS. It stands for, I think it's statistical analysis software, where it was kind of like an older version of an R or a Python, but it was very focused on business analytics. So we would try and automate a lot of our work using SAS, but a lot of it was using big data in SQL. So the main client that I was working for was a supermarket in Australia. And you can imagine supermarkets have a lot of customer data. So any product that anyone was buying, we would essentially see, okay, this customer purchased this many units of this product at this price for this discount. And there was a lot of things that you could do with that data. So that was my first role, essentially analyzing the data about customers and what they purchased and trying to recommend different things that they might want to purchase. And we would try and recommend them through email campaigns. So I was in the team that was in the back trying to identify different segments of customers that we would target with a very specific email. And we would also identify which products we should promote to customers. So in a way, it was very firmly in the campaign analytics space. And for me, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. I didn't want to see myself, I didn't see myself spending all my time manually clicking and building customer campaigns and email campaigns for all of my career. So I think around one year in, I started getting really frustrated. And that was when I actually found out about data science and data scientist as a potential role that I could move into. So from there, I did what every aspiring data scientist does, even to this day. So I was learning how to do Python. I was doing a lot of R as well. I was reading blogs, reading GitHub, reading source code from Python packages. I was literally doing everything that is recommended. I was doing Coursera courses as well. And I was just doing everything that I could to learn about data science and AI and machine learning so I could make my transition into a data scientist role. And I spent around 6 months waking up at probably 4:30 or 5 a.m. in the morning, working for a few hours at home, learning Python on my own or different things like that. And I would just go to work a little bit late, and my manager would kind of be a little bit angry at me and say, "Oh, why are you late?" And then I did that for 6 months, and I got to a point where I was quite comfortable going to interviews for data science roles. And around that time, I had recruiters reach out to me, and they wanted to put me forward for some of these roles. Data science back in Sydney at that time, this was around like 2015, 2016, it was still a really emerging space. I think when I think of Sydney, it's kind of 2 to 3 years behind the US. So when the US has something crazy that comes out, we can usually expect it to hit Australia a few years later. So it was around that time that data science was starting to really pick up, and I wanted to move into that space. But there was always the issue of to be a data scientist, you have to have data science experience. And I didn't really have data science experience, even though I was working on learning all the stuff on the side. I was reading research papers and doing all that sort of stuff. But every time I went to an interview, it just didn't really work. And all the hiring managers would kind of say, "Okay, Danny, you're really passionate about AI and data science, but you just don't have enough experience, so we can't hire you." And that happened a few times, and I was kind of pretty disappointed because I was working my butt off for 6 months, day in, day out, and trying to increase my skills in data science so I could essentially move across. But I couldn't. And I had this period where I really wanted only a data scientist role because I was working as a data analyst already. I wasn't quite open to moving to another company in the same data analyst position. I thought that I had to have a promotion, so to speak, and to go up one level to be a data scientist. And then when I was interviewing for a few more roles, my recruiter actually put me in touch for a digital analyst role. And at first I thought, I'm not too interested because I only wanted to do data science. So he convinced me to take the interview. I went to the interview and I found out that the team that I was interviewing for, they actually have direct projects working with the data science team. And this was within the Commonwealth Bank. It's one of the largest banks in Australia. So it was actually the data science team in that company at the time was very, very famous. A lot of really strong data scientists were working in that team. So I was actually, when I found out that they were working closely with the digital team that I was trying out for, it made me really excited. And I thought that I didn't need to have a data scientist role as long as there was some sort of clear progression that I could move towards being a data scientist. And that was really important for me because it got me over the hump of, okay, I needed to get into a data science role, and I'm not going to try any other role unless it was a data scientist. So that was one of the main things I learned from that experience. And it was really funny because when I got to the final round interview for that digital role, the GM, the general manager, is the one who interviews right at the end just to make sure that everything's okay. And it turns out that the general manager for this digital analytics team was actually, he was just a really, really smart man. So this is back in 2016. He was like one of the contributors for the Julia programming language, which is starting to become quite popular these days because it's really quick and really efficient. But back in 2016, this general manager, like a business executive who had an accounting degree and all the qualifications, he was actually in his spare time coding and writing some of the source code for Julia. So he was a very, very smart man. And I spent the final interview with him just talking about machine learning because he loved machine learning. And at that time, I was actually really into Kaggle, and I wanted to, like, my dream was to become like a top Kaggle grandmaster, so then people would know that I'm a good data scientist. That didn't really happen because I wasn't very good at Kaggle. But as I was talking with the general manager for this final interview, right at the end, he told me, "You know, this role is not for a data scientist role, right?" And I kind of didn't know what to say to that because I think the only thing I could say was just to be honest that I knew it's not for a data scientist role, but I wanted to become a data scientist in the future. And I saw that this was a great opportunity to learn about data and learning about the digital space as well. So I was really fortunate that I got the role because my background in the digital area, as well as being able to understand data very deeply, has helped me immensely throughout my career. And I think it's something really important because these days, I think when people are coming out of university or even as they're starting in the industry, they are really very, very focused on, I only want to do machine learning. I only want to do data science. I'm not interested in a data analyst role because I only want to do machine learning. So for me, one of the most valuable things that I learned throughout my career was to start focusing on data and using data to solve problems. And machine learning is just one of those modalities that you can use and utilize the data in more advanced ways to solve different types of problems. So I spent a few years in that role, in the digital analytics role, where I started working very closely with the data science team. And after one project, I got moved directly into the data science team. So I became a data scientist in the end. And I spent probably two to 3 years in that role working on lots and lots of different problems around the retail bank. So anything where I was recommending customers or recommending products to customers, identifying different breaking points in the customer experience and the customer journeys. We would try and roll out new digital features for their mobile applications and would track what customers are doing. We would send surveys out. It was amazing. It was probably the best experience of my career so far in terms of learning in depth about how data scientists would approach different problems. And in particular, we were very focused on measuring the value of everything that we were doing. And I think that is really important for everyone who's tuning in too as well. A lot of the times we really focus on building models and using deep learning and making sure the model score or the model metric is perfect. But when we're working in the industry, having a really good model is great, but you need to know how to use the model and design experiments. And I think that's where the science component really comes in, because science is all about measuring things, making assumptions, making predictions, and checking whether our predictions match reality. Every time we use any sort of machine learning model for a business use case, there's always bound to be some sort of experimentation component where you'll have maybe you'll have a treatment group or an experiment group, and you'll have a control group or a holdout group, and you try and measure the uplift of whatever your model is doing. Things like that is really, really important. And it's something which I don't see a lot of, there's not a lot of education on that experimentation component. For me personally, I never learnt about any of that in university, and I had to learn everything on the job. So it was very interesting for me, and I really enjoy sharing my experiences and teaching people about these specific things that you might not necessarily learn in the classroom, but you'll definitely learn on the job. So after a few years of doing that stuff, I started focusing more around the data engineering components. So I worked on quite a few data science problems trying to predict rare events, predict fraud behavior and different things like that. But there was still a disconnect because every time we had a project that needed data, usually data at a customer level, we'd have to go and source everything ourselves. So what they say about data scientists spending 80 to 90% of the time cleaning data, I think it's very true, but the 90% also includes time finding data, especially when you're working in large organizations where the data can kind of live everywhere. So in the bank, there were just lots and lots of legacy silos in different areas of the bank where you had to apply for different access before they even gave you a SQL database access. So different things like that, you'd have to maneuver around in a corporate environment very strategically because you can't really. It's just very an interesting space that you'll get more and more used to as you get more experience in that area. So I really enjoyed doing the data engineering components because working as a data scientist, the most important thing was getting the data. And one of my last projects at the bank was to create essentially we built like a time series database where we would track almost every single customer and we'd be able to identify all the different events that they were doing. So you can imagine someone clicking on a website or opening an email from the bank. Maybe they withdrew some money from their bank account at the ATM, or if they called the call center to complain about something. We would have all of this data in one single place. And one of my final projects was to build that entire data asset. And we also got the chance to productionize it and put it into a more rigorous environment. So then we can start sharing all of that data across the different analytics teams within the bank. So it was a huge project, and it led to quite good efficiency in terms of the analysts can now query one place of data to get a single view of things at a customer level. And that was really valuable. And then that was my last project at the bank. And then I moved and started my own company to focus more on consulting and contracting roles. So I started my own company and took on a contract from a supermarket. So I actually went back to the first client that I worked with as I was working in that data analyst space with Quantium. So I was back at the supermarket, but this time they wanted to do, my role was more focused around machine learning engineering and data engineering in the cloud. So they were doing a cloud transformation from, I think at the time was from AWS onto GCP or Google Cloud Platform. So I had a really great opportunity to learn a lot of the newer cloud machine learning tools and also help the business migrate a lot of their legacy data assets from one cloud to the other. So that was a really great experience as well. That was very challenging for me because working as a data scientist, we're not always challenged to write really high quality code. We're not really expert developers or programmers. I think usually that is the role of the data engineers and the machine learning engineers, where they're supposed to be really, really good with the programming. So for me, that was a really great learning experience because I had to essentially upskill myself in the development side of things so I can do everything in production quality, having a very large focus on cloud computing and config-driven development as well. So that was really, really great learning experience. And I think it's something that we don't focus a lot in the education space as well. A lot of the times we usually, let's say we're learning about deep learning and we'll be going through everything in a notebook and just going through everything line by line, running each cell. When the time comes to try and flip that notebook approach, where we might be hacking away at different lines and different models and trying different layers and different things like that, by the time you have to translate that into something that you want to put into a production system, sometimes it's really difficult because the way that you format the code and the way that you develop your classes and different things like that is very, very different to how a software engineer would be doing all of those things. So I had to really change my thinking and think more like a software developer as opposed to thinking like a crazy data scientist who just tries everything. So that was really interesting. And I think for anyone who's wanting to move more into that engineering space and they have a background in software development and computer science, it's actually a really good transition across into those engineering roles, because you'll find that a lot of the software components and the I think just the programming principles have to be there for those roles. So it's a really good match. So after I was in that consulting role for around 18 months or so, and I felt like I wanted to move not really away from the consulting, but I wanted to have a change. I think for a lot of people who are working in the industry, they kind of have like this feeling of having a sabbatical or a year off or doing different things like that. So I started having like thoughts about what can I do to actually help the community? How can I give back to other people? How can I provide help that my mentors provided to me as I was working and learning about data science? How can I provide that to other people at a global scale? And that was what drove me to start posting on LinkedIn and to build the Data with Danny community. And around this time last year, I started doing live streams as well. So this was live streaming on YouTube, on LinkedIn, focusing more on what things aspiring data analysts and data scientists should be focusing on. And from there, I kind of fell into it because I had a chat with some of my other friends in the LinkedIn space who have a lot more followers than I do. And they were suggesting that maybe you should consider education or teaching people about what you know. And quite frankly, before I had a chat with them, I didn't actually think that I would go out and do any online courses or do anything like this. All I wanted to do was kind of help people individually and continue doing my consulting roles and different things like that. But one thing led to another, and essentially I stopped working full-time in August in 2020, and I've been practically full-time on the Data with Danny. I created my own online course website, and I delivered my first online course in February of this year, of 2021. And my whole plan was to kind of deliver my vision was to do some sort of online courses in a way where if participants and students were to actually go through each of the courses and finish all of the projects and start developing their own GitHub portfolio, it would be the equivalent of running a live virtual apprenticeship or an internship with a company. And that has been my sole focus for the last 12 months, essentially. And I've been kind of jumping on these meetups and live streams and different things with my friends in the community to just kind of share what I'm doing, share some of my experiences, and also to answer a lot of questions. So, and I see quite a few hands being raised in the chat here. So I'm more than happy to start answering questions at any point in time. I think I've had enough of talking about myself for now. But yeah, I hope that some of my story about the journey that I've gone through is inspiring, maybe, or motivates people who are in this same situation where they're wanting to move into a data science role, but they're not quite sure how to break into it. I hope that some of these thoughts and ideas will really resonate with you. And LaSalle has also posted a few links in the chat as well. So I've got my first online course is called Serious SQL or Serious SQL. And for me, learning SQL is one of the most important things for any data professional. It doesn't matter if it's a machine learning engineer or a data engineer or a data scientist. I think data, usually for now, a lot of the tabular row column based data sets that we deal with, they live in databases. And SQL is the way that we interact with these databases to run very complex table joins and queries and analytical queries and all these other things that we can do to analyze the data and use it to solve some of our problems and answer some of the questions that the business might want to know. So for me, the thing that I wanted to focus on first was to teach all of my students everything that I know about SQL. So that's my very first course. And I've also got the people might have seen on LinkedIn, I post about the 8-week SQL challenge, which is I've created 8 free case studies or SQL case studies with included data and an online virtual environment that you can play around with these data sets. And the most important thing is that for each case study, I've also prepared a series of questions. They're essentially business case questions, which they're all based off some of the experiences that I've had in my career working as a data scientist and a data analyst. So I tried to make it as realistic as possible. All of the solutions are actually inside the Serious SQL course, and there's additional exercises and everything in there as well. But the Serious SQL course is mostly, I created it for everyone, so there's no prerequisite. So if you've never dealt with SQL before, if you've never done programming before, you can still take it. The whole course is based on Docker and PostgreSQL. I tried to make it as relevant as possible and as easy as possible for everyone to start coding in SQL and solving problems. So it kind of takes you from a journey of setting up the system and then also starting to answer some questions, doing more complex table joins, and then really focusing on end-to-end SQL scripting solutions to solve some pretty challenging case studies. So if that's interesting, I've shared a link with LaSalle in the chat below, and I've currently got a special coupon code for everyone who's on the call as well to take $10 off. So currently, the course is priced at $29 US. There is going to be a price increase to $49 US, probably sometime around this month. But at the moment, I've also got that code AI Pie Colombo. If you put that into the checkout after looking at the course, you'll be able to take $10 off and bring it down to $19 until the price increases. So please make sure you guys come in and take advantage of it. I'm in the progress of setting up a private Discord server for all of the students so we can kind of interact much more directly. There's also lots of Q&A within each of the tutorials. So if you run into any issues at all, you can write me a question directly in that tutorial and I'll be able to come back and answer you asynchronously. And yeah, I think I'm going to also start some study groups as well, because I found I've had a few hundred students sign up to the course, so we're around 800 students now. But the issue is not with more people purchasing the course, but I really want all my students to actually finish the course. So I'm thinking of how can I create some study groups and make people accountable to actually get through all of the content and to work with each other and to motivate each other as well. So those are the new things that are coming on board really soon. But yeah, I hope that is interesting and exciting. I'm happy to answer any questions about the course and the different, not just SQL or anything as well. I'm very happy to talk about any of the other things that we're working on too.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Before we move on to the Q&A session, I just want to make a small announcement to our participants. Participants, please note we will be sharing a feedback form which will be available in the chat. And it is important that all participants should fill this form in order to be eligible for the Coursera rewards as promised for this event. So without further ado, let's move on to the Q&A session. So Danny, I actually have a list of questions from our audience we have picked in advance. So I guess they are eagerly waiting for your answers. So let me just get right into the questions. And to those who want to still ask some more questions, there will be a Padlet link distributed in the chat below. So feel free to ask more further questions. Okay, so let me go to the questions list. So up on our first question, we have, okay, it goes as, I'm completely new to AI. What are the direct steps I must take to specialize in this field?
Okay, that's a really great question. So AI, most people think of AI as applying deep learning or machine learning to solve different problems. Maybe we're building very complex deep learning models or self-driving cars and different things like that. I think that is what most people think of as an AI specialist. You might be focusing on image recognition or processing sound waves or image files or different things like that. What we see in the industry is that the number of AI specialists is actually quite low at the moment. there are not many roles which are very focused heavily on AI research or AI implementation in that sense. A lot of the low-hanging fruit, or a lot more of the roles in AI and data science and machine learning are actually with established companies where they just have very simple data. It might be maybe not the images or the videos or the different things that are really sexy and really cool that we all want to try and use for our careers. Like there's all these awesome things like using X-ray images to detect different cancers or different things like that, which are really awesome. And like, I think I'd love to work in that space as well. But the fact of the matter is that there are just not many roles in that space. So I think for anyone who's interested in becoming an AI specialist, having that as your goal is a really, really important thing. So knowing that eventually you want to work in that industry where you can apply these really cool techniques to solve really challenging problems and make a big difference in the world, I think that's really big and really important to have that goal. But when we scale it back to a set of steps or a plan to actually reach that step or reach that goal of achieving those awesome things, what I'd usually recommend is to get really comfortable with data. Data is the most important thing because when we do artificial intelligence or machine learning, it's all about the inputs as well as the outputs as well. So if you have really high quality data inputs that you really understand and know how to use and manipulate, and you also know how to set up the output criteria so you can build the machine learning model really well, that's where we can do some amazing things. So I think I usually recommend for anyone who's starting off their journey into AI to just kind of follow your gut and start where you have a strong interest. For me, I usually recommend, okay, if you really love doing deep learning, maybe you can take some of these deep learning specializations, or you can look at FOSS.ai or different things like that to learn about the implementation of some of these deep learning models. But at the same time, you should always keep the focus on the data at the forefront as well. So as you're doing some of these deep learning courses, also focus on some of the more less sexy things, like learning SQL is really important. Being able to use Python at an adequate level is really important also. So those are the two things I usually recommend to people. It would be to start learning some SQL because data in the tabular format is everywhere. And that will help you get your first role within the data ecosystem, whether it's a data analyst or a data scientist or data engineer or anything like that. Being very good with SQL is definitely something that will help. And then whilst you're doing some of the SQL, you can learn some of the deep learning, keep up to date with what's going on, but really focus on the data when you're going in for entry-level roles. So that would be your SQL and being adequate with Python as well as a programmer. Hope that helps.
Thank you, Danny. Our second question is, will it be better for an undergraduate student in AI to directly enter into the field or go for a postgraduate degree?
I get this question a lot as well. So I find that it's very specific in different parts of the world. So for example, in the US, having a master's degree or a PhD is a very good differentiator because there's just a lot of competition in the US market. In Australia, for example, they only recently started having masters and more advanced degrees in AI and data science and machine learning. But they've always had the masters in computer science focusing on deep learning, or they've also had masters of statistics and masters of maths and different things like that, which are more established. And we see in the industry, so for example, I don't have a master's degree or a PhD in anything. For me, having a bachelor's was enough to get me into the door. And then I started working in the industry, and I never really felt the need to do more of those studies because I was already in there. But I know that I was probably one of the earlier ones that moved into the data science field. So I consider myself really lucky because there was just less competition at that point in time. So depending in Sri Lanka, for example, if there's a lot of competition for AI and machine learning roles, And you're noticing that for all of those roles, you must have a requirement of X number of years of experience or a master's or a PhD. Usually the people who are hiring for those roles are only looking for entry level people coming in who have those advanced degrees. So I would say for a lot of people, they would say go do the masters because you need the masters to apply for these roles. For me, my experience is if you get into the industry and you start working on data and express your interests in working and moving into the AI space, if you're really diligent and you're very hardworking, you can still make it into that space without the degrees. And that's my direct experience and a few of the experience of my peers as well. But on the other hand, I also have a lot of mentors and friends who do have the master's degree and the PhD who have worked in data science and they're really, really good. So I think it really depends. There's no right or wrong. I think also a master's degree, depending on different parts of the world, can be very expensive as well. So that's another thing to factor in. A lot of the times you're either going to be working full time and doing a master's part time, or you will not work at all and you are just studying full time. And that has its own costs and opportunity costs and different things like that. So consider all of those things before diving into, I must have a master's to make it into AI is my advice.
Thanks, Danny. And also, it's very true because recently Sri Lanka also data science has started trending in, especially into the industry as well. So a lot of universities have opened degree courses for data science. Moving on to our fourth question. No, sorry, it was the third question. I am more into the creative side of things and not into math. Is AI for me?
Okay, so I really like this question actually because the more that I work in this space of helping individuals and educating people on AI and data science and SQL and all these different things, the creative side of things is actually, I would say, it's more important than being good with the mathematical side of things. And here's why, right? So a lot of the times when we're doing a lot of the machine learning and the data science and the experimentation and things like that, most of the time you actually don't need to know the mathematical formulas. You need to understand what's going on, but you might not need to prove it from first principles because there's just no time to do that in a business setting. But when we're working through those problems and applying these methods that we understand well enough to understand what's going on underlying some of these algorithms, we then have to explain it to business stakeholders or non-technical people who might not understand. And I think that being on the creative side really helps that communication angle. So whether it's you have to come up with a nice diagram to explain what sort of thing you've done in your experiment, or it could be designing some data visualization to really get across an insight that you want to convince a really senior business stakeholder to make a decision that will benefit your team. I think having a good creative mind is really useful for that. And especially when, for me, for example, I've been thinking more about how can I teach people what I know? And having a strong mathematical background, I think it definitely helps a little bit. But for me, I did quite a lot of math in my undergrad, but I honestly can't remember much of what I did 1 year ago or 2 years ago. So I'm always relearning and relearning things that I've forgotten or that I just no longer use. So I think math is one of those things which can be learnt. It's not like a binary. You can do math or you can't do math. I think you can definitely learn and improve your skills. If you don't have a lot of baseline level skills at the moment, you can definitely improve them. I think for machine learning and data science, the most important thing is usually the statistics and probability theory of understanding distributions and different things like that. For deep learning and different things where you need to understand like some very basic calculus and differentiation, that's usually the extent to get you started. And then when you find that you run into issues which you haven't learned before, there's a lot of online information that you can quickly go and supplement your understanding, and then you can learn about it on the fly. So think of it as just-in-time learning is really valuable. And I think having that creative mindset is, I would say it's equally valuable, if not more valuable, than having a technical mindset. Hope that helps.
Okay. Our next question is, what are the ethical aspects of data collection for machine learning?
Okay, this is also a really great question. Ethics is really, really important in our industry. I can give you guys, have you heard of the story of I think it was Kmart or Target in the US? Apparently they were running some email campaign for, I think it was for baby products. I don't know if this is a true story or not, but they were collecting purchases based off a customer ID. And they identified this customer who was purchasing, I think it was a pregnancy test, and they were purchasing baby nappies and different things like that. And apparently the customer ID was actually linked to the father of like a 17-year-old girl or something like that. And she was using his card to purchase the baby products. So they sent the father an email saying, congratulations about the baby. And it didn't really go down well. And this was like a big scandal. And I don't know if it was actually true, but that was one of the stories that we were told about ethical use of data and data collection. So I think the collection of data is one thing, but the use of it in identifying specific segments of customers or using it to bias any sort of racial discrimination or socioeconomical situations as well is definitely a no-go zone, especially within the financial markets. Like it's not financial markets, but more around like banking and different things like that, where areas are heavily regulated. It's definitely a no-go zone. But what we're seeing now is that the biggest collectors of data in our industry is usually the tech companies. So you can imagine all your Google searches are being tracked. Everything that you view on Instagram, on Facebook, all of the TikTok that you're using and all these different things are all being tracked. And it's crazy the amount of information that you can get from people's viewing behavior, because it kind of represents your personality in a sense, what your interests are, what your behaviors are, how often do you spend on these different social media applications. If you can tie that up to what sort of products you're purchasing, you can see how it can be very easily misused to help you buy things that you can't afford, or to give you a line of credit when you can't afford to pay it back, and different things like that. So ethical considerations of how you're going to use the data is really important. And collecting data is also key as well. So for all these companies, the tech companies, they can collect all these data, but the question should be, should they be able to link it back to an individual customer? And if they can link it back to an individual customer, should they use that to help other companies with their marketing? Is that a gray line, or is it just competitor advantage? I think all of these things we'll probably hear more about in the future as it becomes more and more of an issue, and more, I think once the general public understands the amount of pervasiveness of the data collection and how it can be used to sway our decisions, I think that's when we'll see much more focus on the ethics of AI.
Okay. Speaking of which, I did get another question regarding the future of data science. It goes as, do you think there will be more advancements in supervised learning or unsupervised learning?
That's a great question too. I think supervised learning, it's getting to the point where if your data is really great and you're able to define your target criteria very well, then the supervised learning almost becomes like a trivial sort of thing. There's like a lot of auto machine learning where you just throw out the label, throw out the data, and it just gives you the best model. And it might even do some stacking and aggregation of different models, which can contribute to the final best model, kind of like a Kaggle competition. And like companies like Data Robot, for example, are doing this at scale with massive data sets and with their clients, which are really powerful in the corporate space. So I think supervised learning is the challenge for supervised learning is always going to be not how do I build the best model for supervised learning, but it's always about how can I build the best data set for supervised learning. And by building the data set, it's not just throw all the customers in and give them ones and zeros, and then we just let the supervised learning do the thing. Having the scientific and experimentation mindset to define the one and the zero and the target variables is very important. This is where I focused a lot in my career in doing the supervised machine learning for rare event prediction. We're always dealing with like a supervised learning problem where the target label with a positive signal of like 0.01%. So only 0. Whatever, a very, very low number of cases, you'd have like 20 instances out of 100,000 would be a positive case. Everything else is negative. How do you build models for those things? How do you define that positive and negative state for these types of problems? And it becomes more complex as you go into time-based temporal machine learning problems as well. So one of the first problems that I worked with in machine learning was predicting which customers were likely to take out some sort of financial product in the next 30 days, for example. And that prediction should be changing every day. So if someone's done something recently, like visiting a product page about credit cards, maybe it will increase their probability that they're going to take out a credit card in the next 30 days. So all these different things we should focus on for supervised learning in terms of how do we define the target variable better. But in terms of unsupervised learning, I think this is where machine learning and deep learning in particular is really, really useful. So there's all these things like you can use transformers these days to just understand what's going on in your data set. So not just in a tabular format, but you can use transformers for natural language processing, for images and different things like that to just extract numerical feature understanding of the space and trying to get that embedding and then using the embeddings to do some sort of analysis of what sort of data you have in there. So I think that's where a lot of the power is going to come from in the AI, is in this unsupervised learning. But I think a lot of the current business value that's coming through is going to be in supervised learning, because I think that's much more easier to explain to businesses. But I think there should be a blending of both unsupervised and supervised approaches, where you might try something unsupervised first to get an understanding of the problem. You can rip out the final embedding features and try and build a model based off them, and then try and translate it back to really simple variables. Things like that has been proven to work in the industry as well. But I think it's a really interesting space. And I think both supervised and unsupervised learning have their places, and both will continue to improve over time.
Okay, we have another interesting question. Breaking into one of the biggest debates, what language is suitable for a beginner to start in AI, R or Python?
Okay, I will be I'll annoy a few people, but I will say Python. Disclaimer is that when I first started doing data science, everything was done in R. So the company that I was in, the entire tech platform was only supporting R. There was no Python support at all. And eventually we started working more on Python because we wanted to try some deep learning stuff and different things like that. So we convinced the tech platform team to help us set up a platform where we can actually deploy some of the Python models, and to prove whether that had any uplift over the traditional, like we were using boosted trees and XGBoost and different things in R. So I think for a lot of people think of R as like it's for statisticians or for people who want to do data visualization. I think that's definitely the case. There's a much more skew towards people in those professions doing their work mostly in R. And I think you can do a lot of machine learning in R, like think of the traditional machine learning algorithms. But I think where R kind of runs short is when it starts going to deep learning. And I would say if you're interested in doing deep learning for AI, you almost have no other choice but to be very good at Python, because that's where a lot of the implementations are right now. Another thing that's coming up is probably Julia. There's been a lot of talk about Julia and a lot of promise because it's expected to be much, much faster. People are talking about the speed of Julia should be very close to writing in C or C++, so something at a very low level. But it has the flexibility and I think it's also very good to define your mathematical approaches in Julia as well. So you can essentially write math and then add it as layers, as opposed to having different libraries that actually create the layers for you. So you can have quite a lot of mathematical flexibility in there as well. But I would say to be very good with data in general, I would say SQL is probably one of the most important things to learn. So even if you wanted to work in artificial intelligence and data science, a lot of the times you'll have to interact with databases. I keep talking about this over and over again, but for me, being good with SQL was one of the things that helped me progress very quickly in my data career, because I could go and find the data myself. And then I had much more time to go and explore some of the machine learning and deep learning implementations, because I didn't have to waste my time looking for data. So I hope that hope that motivates people to take a look at SQL as a very good candidate for something that you should be learning in conjunction with a Python, for example.
Our next question goes as, which area is most developing, computer vision or natural language processing?
I think there's a lot of developments in both of them. Back in 2016 or 2015, around that time, one of my first image recognition projects, this was crazy because back in the time I thought that I'd be like a millionaire from this idea, but I wanted to like do an image recognition application for IKEA. So imagine like you're walking on the street and you see a really nice piece of furniture that you want to buy. So my idea was someone has an app and they take a photo of the furniture on the street, and then it will do like image matching, image similarity with the IKEA database, and then it'll show you like, oh, you can get this thing which is close to the furniture that you saw on the street from IKEA. So that was like back in 2016, and it was really interesting for me because I had to learn how to scrape the IKEA website to build a database of images, and then I had to extract features from the images and build models, and then it was really fun. But I think I had no idea what I was doing. And a lot of people back in those days there was a lot of crazy stuff going on, and nothing really amounted to anything in 2016 or so. But fast forward 4 or 5 years, and now these days for image recognition, there's all these crazy, really effective models that you can use practically off the shelf. You can do some transfer learning if you have a very specific data set of images that you wanted to improve the baseline model to make it more specific for your specific area. And there's all these different things that you can do. You can do exactly the same thing, but with your natural language processing as well. So if you have there's all these really crazy popular ones right now from Google and like GPT-3 and all these other things that you can use as transformers. And for transfer learning. So I think both of them are crazy. And for me, like, I haven't seen much of these things being used in the industry yet because they're so new. Only the large companies like Google, Facebook, and etc. are the ones who are using their own research to drive their machine learning based products. And you can just see how successful they are. So over time, as more of these companies that are not Google and Facebook and Netflix, etc., and they start adopting these technologies, you can see like even more research advancements and opportunities in this space. So I reckon both of them are really interesting. I would say video and audio are also really up and coming as well, especially now that we've got like TikTok and Snapchat and stories and reels and all these different things which are video formats. I think that's going to be really popular in the future. So I wouldn't think of it just as image recognition, but more about it's almost like temporal image recognition in the form of videos to try and predict what's going to happen in a stream of video data as opposed to just static images. And for natural language processing, I think that's the same as well.
That's an interesting note. And our next question is, what MOOCs or online certifications on data science are recognized qualifications and hold some weight within the field?
This is a great question. It's something which comes up quite a lot as well. So I get asked this question almost every single day, either on LinkedIn or on my Slack channel of like, oh, should I do the Azure certification or the Google Cloud certification or different things like that? I would have to be honest. I think a lot of the MOOCs or the MOOCs, sometimes some hiring managers don't like them. And there are clear reasons for it, right? So a lot of these days, because the MOOCs are so accessible, anyone can do a MOOC and anyone can add it to their resume. So it's becoming more and more difficult to actually have that on your resume and to use it as a differentiating factor with the rest of the competition because everyone else might have one. And on the flip side of that, if you don't have those certifications, and you're compared to someone else who does have those certifications, the question would be, does it matter so much that the person who does have the certifications will get benefit over you who doesn't have those certifications? And from my experience in hiring people and looking through resumes and doing interviews, there's not a big difference between whether you have the certification or not. The most prevalent thing is usually whether you have a strong portfolio. And this portfolio could be like, you could be blogging on LinkedIn or Medium and writing about your experiences. Or it could be you have a GitHub Pages blog where you write about the things that you're learning about deep learning and SQL and Python, different things. It could be if you're posting regularly on LinkedIn, you have a good persona and a personal brand, and you're much more in the, I would say, in the awareness of the hiring managers in that sense. So if you have some sort of social presence, that really helps as well. But usually when we go through resumes, the first thing that we look for is usually a GitHub link, as opposed to looking for certifications. Because most of the time, like, I think MOOCs are really useful. I've learned quite a lot from doing some online courses. When I think of the certification, it's nice to have. It will be a good value add, but it won't have that much incremental value as opposed to someone who doesn't have those certificates, but they have a really, really strong portfolio and presence online. I think those two things, having a really strong GitHub, having a blog, writing about your experiences and demonstrating that you have good problem solving skills and good communication skills, I think that is much more valuable than just having a few certifications on your resume and not much else to prove about it, if that makes sense. So I'm not saying don't do certifications. Like, I think doing certifications is awesome, and investing your time and energy into learning more is definitely a good investment. I would say don't stop there. So if you're going to be doing certifications, make sure you're using your knowledge that you're learning from those courses to start building a project, or to start building a portfolio of projects which you can share with hiring managers to help you differentiate yourself from other people who are doing the certification, but they don't have those projects. So I think it's just about going the extra few steps to really stand out for the hiring managers.
Okay, Danny, we have one more question, and I think, this is our last question for the Q&A session. So what are the entrepreneur opportunities available in the field of AI?
Oh, that's excellent question. So for me, having gone through this experience of working as a data analyst and then trying to move into data science, and then after data science, starting my own company and doing my own online courses and focusing more on entrepreneurship, I think I've got quite a good experience across that whole space to share as much as I can about these topics. So I think for entrepreneurship, there's always going to be a space for educators. So I know there's this negativity of people who work in the industry and then they eventually stop working because they realize that they can do online courses and they can make more money from it, for example. What I want to tell you is, as a course creator myself, don't expect to make too much money at the beginning because it takes a long time. And I think that there's an allure of, okay, I want to be a data entrepreneur. I'm going to do my courses. I'm going to sell 10,000 courses. I'm going to be a millionaire. There are a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of people, but there are people who are doing that. But I think it's much more common for people who want to do entrepreneurship within the data space. Online courses is one angle. Another thing could be social good companies. So think of not for profits and different things which are doing more education. So one of my good buddies is doing a not for profit educational data company. So he's trying to teach companies or teach individuals about how to learn life skills as teenagers to start moving and be very effective in the workforce. I think that's another space. Another one could be there are companies, or usually what I've also seen is consulting is another good space for entrepreneurship as well. So, for example, my company was created for the purpose of consulting. And the purpose, I think usually that happens naturally over time. But you have to be well known in the industry, especially in your area. So, for example, in Sydney, I can go in and have conversations with relatively senior people and see if they're interested in working with me. As someone who's starting off in the data science space, it's much more difficult to get your foot in the door and have these sorts of conversations, which could lead to more work. So I think the experience thing is another factor. So a lot of the times you hear of people talking about entrepreneurship, like you should quit your job straight away and start your own company because that's the only way you'll make money, you'll have freedom, different things like that. But I think in the data space, it's very prevalent that you need some sort of experience unless you're going to be working on your own company in a space which is very specific to your skill set and you have a strong niche in it. So you might have, so for Google, for example, the founders were essentially PhD researchers working on some crazy PageRank algorithm, and then they decided to use that to build a company. Same for Facebook, where Mark Zuckerberg drops out and tries to build like the Facebook and the different social networks for Harvard, I think it was. But some of those things, they're more of the, how do I put it? They're kind of like the black swan approach of startups. So if you have a really great idea, you don't necessarily need experience to do it, but the idea has to be qualified through the market for you to have a successful company through that as well. But I would say that entrepreneurship in the data space is awesome. And for me, like my vision is to, once I train my students to learn SQL, learn Python, do all these other stuff, have a really great career in data. My vision is to help a lot of these data scientists and data professionals eventually end up become data entrepreneurs. Because for me, I think that's where there's a lot of value in helping other people. You can help people at scale and be very successful and live your life on your terms if you're running it with more freedom. So I think that's what I'm very passionate about. And I think there's definitely a lot of opportunities in this space.
Okay, Daddy, we just got one more question which just popped up now. So let me just ask that as well. Can I know the opportunities available for AI, ML, data engineering internships in Australia, and how can I apply for these?
Okay, so in Australia, it's actually really rare for intern data science roles. So I would say there are a few and they might increase the number, but they usually preference locals. So locals from the like PhD programs or master's programs usually, or things like that. But I think coming to Australia, once the whole crazy situation of the borders and everything is over, it might actually be easier to come across as a specialist in data in general, and not so much at an entry level. There's a huge demand for, I would say, middle experience, like medium level experience to senior experience in the machine learning space, because there's just a massive shortage in it all around. I think in the US, they have that shortage as well. But the issue with that is, how do you build up enough experience to then move across to a different country as well? I think it's really, it's a challenge to try and work overseas for an internship, especially if you have to relocate as well. Most companies just won't consider it as an option. I'm like really sorry to say that, but I think if you wanted to move across as a intermediate level employee, to move across into a data team or an analytics team or even a data science team as well, that's much more probable than moving across for an intern position. So that's just something to consider. And things that will help with that is to have a really strong portfolio. If your presence on LinkedIn or different things like that is high as well, that can definitely help. For me, I found being active on LinkedIn has helped me so much, not just in my like my social career or different things like that, but it's helped me a lot in terms of the professional connections that I've been able to make. So through LinkedIn, I've been able to connect with 8,000 plus people for the Data with Danny community. I think I just signed something with O'Reilly, so I'll be teaching SQL for the O'Reilly platform in October this year and doing a few different interactive tutorials. And all of these things would never have happened if I didn't start posting regularly on LinkedIn. And you can replicate exactly the same thing and just start posting and sharing your insights and things that you want to share and help other people with from in the data space. Like, you can share what you've learned and different things like that. The difference that can make for people's for your personal brand and your reputation and recognition in the industry is huge, and it cannot be underestimated. It's very, very powerful. So I would recommend, if you are very seriously thinking about moving overseas for whether it's an internship position or an intermediate employee position, having that strong personal brand will help immensely. So consider being more active on LinkedIn.
That's very true, Danny. Again, thank you once again, Danny, for answering all of these questions. I mean, we had a full packed load of questions coming up. So, and I could possibly say, on behalf of all the participants here, they are all probably geared up, ready to start their journey towards the field of AI, thanks to your insight. So it was great having you here for Pie and AI session. With that, I just want to make an additional reminder again to the audience. Please ensure to fill up your feedback. Please ensure to fill up the feedback form so that you would be entitled to your Coursera rewards. So with that being said, let me proceed to the vote of thanks. Starting off, first and foremost, I would like to thank DeepLearning.AI for giving us this amazing window of opportunity to host future Pie and AI series within the deep learning community of Sri Lanka. Next, I would like to thank FOSS IIT and our fellow Mozilla and FOSS clubs, which took part and supported us in this initiative. And finally, a huge thanks to our speaker, Danny Ma, and the deep learners who are present with us today. On behalf of the Mozilla Club of IIT, we are grateful for your involvement and participation. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, so do stay tuned for our upcoming series from Pie and AI Colombo. And I wish you all a wonderful night and stay safe. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much.